This morning I want us to think about goodbyes. What goodbyes are like. All of us have said goodbyes at different times, and what I'd like to think about is what sort of settings do we say goodbye in? This is going to make sense when we get to the scripture passage. This is not a rhetorical question. I don't have the answer for you. What sort of settings do we say goodbye in? Going off to college. All right? Working off of a prayer concerns. We've got that is on our mind. We say goodbye when we drop people off at college. When people leave the house, we have to say goodbye. Yeah, that's a very routine thing sometimes. Or sometimes it's not routine. Yeah, good one.
When you go visit friends and then you talk a while, then you leave.
When we visit friends, that maybe isn't a constant thing, and then we have to say goodbye. Yeah. When people move away, there's goodbyes with that. Yeah, it's not even necessarily in person. On the phone, we say goodbye. I hadn't even thought about that one. It's not just a face-to-face thing sometimes. Sometimes we say goodbye when we're ending a conversation. When we go to school, then we say goodbye. When someone dies, there are hospital bed goodbyes. And so there's all sorts of goodbyes, and there's a lot of emotions with these goodbyes, right? Where we have a wide gamut of emotions with these goodbyes we're talking about, between whether it's a routine goodbye or otherwise. I want you to think this morning of an emotional goodbye you've experienced. This isn't something that you need to share. Just think of something that was a difficult goodbye. That's the sort of goodbye that Paul is doing today. On the next slide, we have a map. Paul is started in Antioch. This is his third missionary journey. And he was feeling blue, apparently. And he went up, and he went to Ephesus. He's at Ephesus for about 3 years. And then he went on from Ephesus, did a quick swing up to Macedonia and Achaia. And he's coming back, and he's trying to get back to Jerusalem by the day of Pentecost. So he's under pressure to get back, and he wants to see the elders of Ephesus. So he contacts them and said, I don't have time to meet you at Ephesus. We'll meet at the port city of Miletus. So the elders come down from there. Paul meets with them. And what we're going to read this morning is this final goodbye in which Paul says, you are never going to see me again. Kind of an emotional goodbye. Paul is not a real well-liked guy in Jerusalem at this time, and that's where he feels led to go. He's pretty sure he's going to be arrested or martyred, and he tells the people at Ephesus, this is goodbye. A lot of emotions charged with this, but also they're hanging on his every word. When someone says, this is the last time you're going to see me, they're going to be listening very closely. So I hope that's the sort of attentiveness that we have with this. That this isn't just a sermon that Paul is giving. This is an emotional goodbye he's giving. We'll pick this passage up with verse 28. It's on page 788 in the Pew Bibles. Acts chapter 20, starting with verse 28. And this is Paul speaking to the elders or the pastors from Ephesus. Keep watch over yourselves and all the flock of which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. Be shepherds of the church of God, which he bought with his own blood. I know that after I leave, savage wolves will come in among you and will not spare the flock. Even from your own number, men will arise and distort the truth in order to draw away disciples after them. So be on your guard. Remember that for 3 years I never stopped warning you each night and day with tears. Now I commit you to God and to the word of his grace, which can build you up and give you an inheritance among all those who are sanctified. I have not coveted anyone's silver or gold or clothing. You yourselves know that these hands of mine have supplied my own needs and the needs of my companions. In everything I did, I showed you that by this kind of hard work we must help the weak, remembering the words of Lord Jesus himself. It is more blessed to give than to receive. When he had said this, he knelt down with all of them and prayed. They all wept as they embraced him and kissed him. What grieved them most was his statement that they would never see his face again. Then they accompanied him to the ship. I want to walk through what this talk was conveying. And the first thing I want to catch is on the next slide. The church computer rejects Greek. That top word is actually prosokete. It's a Greek word for how this is translated as keep watch. It's also pay attention, and it's an imperative. Greek doesn't have any punctuation at this time, but their verb forms do. And so this is an exclamation point. It says keep watch. Pay attention. Sort of like, all those stickers that you have, you don't have to read the language. It has that big exclamation point of danger, pay attention, watch out. That's what Paul is saying. He's starting off here, watch out, pay attention. And on the next slide, you see what he said to keep track of first. Keep watch over yourselves. Now, in case there's any questions, I have here that it's not a mirror. This isn't a narcissism sort of thing. This is not, oh, I'm so handsome today. No, not watching yourself in that sort of way. Keep watch over yourself of watch the basics. The sneakers here are because I'm a fan of the coach that had been at UCLA for decades, John Wooden, 1948 to 1975. I don't know much about basketball, but I do know how the stats work. And so John Wooden won 80% of his games as coach. They won 88 straight at one point. 10 of the last 12 years that he was coach, they won the national championship. Pretty good coach. Also, as an aside, now spoken Christian. But going along, John Wooden, first day of practice, all of these, think of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, think of guys like that coming to the first day of practice, and the first thing John Wooden does is how to tie your shoes. First practice lesson. Make sure the wrinkles are out of your socks so you don't get blisters. Make sure your shoelaces are tight so they don't come untied during the game. Really? That's what it takes? Because if you don't have the basics, the rest of it's not going to work. What Paul is saying here, before you start worrying about everything else of everyone and all the problems around you, make sure your own stuff is in order. Look at your own life. Are you where you should be in your faith walk? Make sure your priorities are right. He goes on from this, from keep watch over yourselves, to keep watch over those under your care. This is verses 28 to 30, where he talked about, for the elders of the church, they need to watch over their church. And somewhat of external things, of things that might be coming in that are dangerous. But what they're really supposed to watch out for is the dangers within. Wolves from within that would rise up. So he has this shepherding sort of idea of making sure things are knocked back, of making sure that you take care of the wolves. If I was one of the leaders of Ephesus, that's not what I would have wanted to hear. What I like is, the problem's not you, it's them. The Roman government. Oh, the Roman government. We hate the Roman government. Everything's their fault. Or maybe, those lousy religions that are in Ephesus. That's the problem. He says, watch out for yourselves. Watch out from within. How true that can be for us. To lay the blame on the government, or lay the blame on culture, or lay the blame on other things. Not that everything is good from those angles. But Paul reminds us, watch out from within. Look for the problems that come from within. What I want us to think about this morning is, who is under our watch care? Who's under your watch care? Maybe it's parents. Maybe it's children. maybe it's nieces or nephews, co-workers. We all have networks of friends and family that we have watch care over. Most likely when I mention that, someone might spring to mind, or someone's. We're going to think about that role that we have, in which we need to keep watch over ourselves and also over those that we love. Not just looking for a scapegoat to blame problems on the outside, but looking the inside of what's really going on. When our family isn't firing on all cylinders, being honest enough to say what's not right. But when maybe there's a lot of tension at work, of being honest enough to say, this is how I contribute to it. On the next slide, this is a reminder to me of the need to take an honest look. While we were away, I finally had a chance to read the book I've been looking forward to. It's one of the recent books about the Austin Dam. Very fascinating to me of that history. And one thing that stood out to me was that it was hard for people to take an honest look at the dangers of the dam. Even by 1910, the dam had bowed, there was water shooting up below the dam as clear as going under the foundation. The engineer no longer stood by the dam. Lots of dangers were clear. But the economy of the town was based on that operation of the dam. And every day that went by was another day that, I guess it's not that bad of a problem. But eventually it would be. And I think how that can be true for my life, in which I know there's a problem, but man, I don't want to deal with it. If I just set it aside, and a day goes by, it didn't get any worse, so maybe I can let it go another day. But generally there's a day of reckoning that comes. We need to be honest about what's going on. And I think that's what Paul is getting at here. He says, pay attention. Keep watch. He also lays out responses that we have when we're honest. Some responses. And the first response is to talk about it. In verse 31, Paul says that he talked about it day and night for 3 years. He wasn't going to let it just lie. I think at times I can use the ostrich approach of stick your head in the ground and eventually the problem will go away and hope for that. That doesn't work. We need to talk things through, of being honest about what the problem is and working through it. I think about how I handle problems sometimes. I am a pacer. If there's a problem, I can allow it to consume me, and I pace back and forth. I wear a trench in the floor, going back and forth. I can figure out a problem. Because it all relies on me, figuring out what the problem is. That's a miss. In verse 32, Paul says, I commit you to God and to His Word. When we're consumed by a problem, it's because we're looking to be a superhero, such as the guy on the bottom of the slide. It looks kind of funny, because it is, when we try to save the day on our own strength. We can't solve every problem on our own. We need to turn things over to God. Commit is entrust to the care and protection, to deposit for safekeeping. When there's a problem in our lives, it's not just solving it on our own. It's committing it to God and committing to His Word, following God's plan. Paul goes on, in the next slide. The third response is to set an example. This goes back to the idea of keeping watch over yourself. Just a simple question here. Are you living a clear alternative to the problem at hand? If there's a problem around you, whether it's at work or in your family or otherwise, do you live your life in such a way that if other people lived that way, it would be a good thing? Sometimes it's alarming to realize how much we contribute to a problem. Of what sort of example am I setting? I'll step back for a minute here because sometimes we can beat ourselves up on this because we all make mistakes. And sometimes our example is going to be admitting mistakes. David mentioned something about our vacation, so I guess I'll talk about that now. We did mountain biking while we were there, and it was down the mountainside, and there were novice trails, and they were really good. But I've been bike riding 3 times in the last 15 years, so I'm an expert. So Seth and I went to an expert trail. Man, they got rocks in the trail right in the way. Who would have thought? And so I told Seth I would go first, so I could kind of show you what to do and kind of test it out. So there's this rock as high as this room. But it was a big rock. It was going down steep. And I tried to keep going slower and slower, but it's steep enough that I needed a little more momentum. And the back end of the bike was starting to go up, and the front wheel was kind of going forwards. And so what does a normal person do? Hit the brakes. And as I hit the brakes, I remember the lady saying, these are disc brakes. They will send you over the handlebars. And sure enough, I hit the brakes, I go over the handlebars, the bike goes off this cliff, I landed in the middle of the rocks, and Seth is, are you okay, are you okay? And I was thinking, how am I going to explain this to Cindy? Everything was fine. However, I did not exactly set a good example. And so once you make a mistake, you have to talk about it. You have to say, well, that was dumb. Never should have done that. And sometimes, I think when we mess up, we try to cover up what we've done. Now, I use that example because it's easy to say I messed up there. But sometimes in life, when we get our priorities wrong, or other things, it's hard to tell our kids or our parents or other friends, boy, I had my priorities wrong. I've got it straightened out now, but don't get me wrong, I was on the wrong path. That's hard to talk about, but that's setting an example. The last thing that Paul did here was he prayed. Not just on his own, but he prayed with them. Not just at the supper table, not just when he's tucking people into bed at night, but he prayed with them. I'm humbled some when I think about how often do I step back and say, we need to pray about this as a family. Or with friends, we need to step back and just pray about this right now. That was the sort of life that Paul had, in which he wasn't going to take a step until he prayed with people. When there's a problem, I don't need to just leave it to an individual prayer, but there's power with praying with other people. The last thing I want to think about is how these responses, talk, commit, set an example, and pray, it's a complete package. Sometimes we get hooked on one. It's easy to kind of go with the talk approach to problems, in which we're sort of like the pigeon approach. You fly in, you drop your bomb, and then you fly back out. That's where you talk about it, but you don't really do anything. And then on the other hand, we can avoid talking about it as much as possible and just say, I'm going to leave this all up to God. Negating the fact that maybe God has given us responsibility, that He is going to work through us in that situation. That maybe we are the conduit that God is going to work through to bring about a change in a problem. We need to be honest about the problems around us. We desperately need to talk about them. We need to commit them to God and His Word. We need to make sure that we're setting an example. We need to pray. The title of this sermon is Encourage. And I think that's something that should stand out here. When Paul is saying goodbye, he's not beating them up about a lack of faith or how bad things are. He said, you know what?